Hey, I'm your host, Melissa, and I want to welcome you to Not Your Average Blonde podcast. I'm here to show you how to elevate your life to become the best version of yourself. I want to take you along your journey to be anything but average and step into your confidence era. Join me each week by subscribing and listening to Not Your Average Blonde podcast, and let's begin our journey to become anything but average. Hello, Not Your Average Bestie. So I want to welcome you again for another episode of Not Your Average Blonde. It's been a couple weeks since I released one. I'm actually getting really close to officially launching this podcast, publicly. But the imposter syndrome has hit so badly the last couple, I'd say probably the last 2 weeks. It's been kind of a difficult slump to pull out of and to kind of get back into this, as well as progressing in other areas of my life. And it's been pretty frustrating. So to kind of break out of it, I wanted to talk about that today, of pulling out of a slump and kind of what you can do during that situation. And so, like I said, for me, the past couple weeks, it's been a bit of a challenge, quite a hurdle that's kind of impacted all areas of my life. And I haven't really been able to pinpoint exactly why. I think it's probably a combination of just a little bit of anxiety with some big decisions that I have coming up with my current job that I'm in, and then just some stressors of those decisions that come with that. I'm just trying to decide, okay, which road do I want to go? And then I'm pushing quite a few things up the hill with this podcast. I'm trying to maintain my health and my fitness, my basic needs. I'm also working on a Pilates instructor certification. So I have quite a bit on my plate, and it has been pretty manageable so far, where I've been able to balance my professional life as well as my personal life, and then also some of the goals and stuff that I'm pursuing to continue progressing and developing. But like I said, the last 2 weeks just kind of just hit me really hard with just imposter syndrome, bits of anxiety, and a lot of self-doubt, weirdly enough, which I think that's something that everyone can relate to. So yeah, so I'm trying to come out of that. And I'm positive I will, but I wanted to talk about for today's episode on what are some things that you can do to to pull yourself out of the slump, and kind of share some of my experiences and some of the things that I do when I find myself in these periods of low energy and just lack of motivation, self-doubt. So starting, I always check in with if my basic needs are being met. Am I sleeping? Am I getting consistent sleep? Am I getting enough sleep? Is the quality of sleep that I'm getting good? Am I eating healthy? Am I working out? And for working out, it doesn't have to be very intense workouts. It can be as simple as just getting outside and just going for a walk, go for a run, just get outside, move your body, get some sunlight. I know sunlight helps me a ton. It's something that I found that I need pretty much almost every single day, because it just makes such a difference for my mood and my positivity, and just gives me some of that space, by taking that time, even if it's 10 minutes, just to kind of get grounded again and move forward with, the rest of the day. So I really value my time with that. Other things are, how's your environment? How's your environment at home? How's your environment at work? For home, I strive really hard to keep my home clean and orderly, and kind of more on the minimalistic side. Clutter stresses me out a bit, and I don't like having a dirty home. It helps with my mental space and my inspiration and creativity when I have, when my home is literally is in order. And so I try to maintain systems that help me to keep that easier, make it easier to maintain my home, and to decrease clutter. So recently I went through, I started noticing some things were stacking up. So I went through and just did a huge purge. I got rid of probably 90% of my wardrobe, got rid of a bunch of clutter and things I don't need around the house, and just, sold some of it, donated a bunch, and just kind of getting back more in touch with some of that minimalistic aspect. For your work environment, that one's a little bit tougher, because you can't always control your working space, but you can, keep your desk clean. You can try to maintain like positive energy like while you're there. The biggest challenge with that is like you have coworkers, you have other people that are in that environment that affect that. If you notice like you have a coworker that kind of drains your energy, maybe like limit your time with them or watch your interactions. Don't participate in like gossip. Like try to stay positive and stay away from those things that bring your energy down. I'll also do like an assessment too of like, what am I doing with my time? Like some of those activities I gave you earlier, when it goes back to like your basic needs is, like, are you working out? Are you eating healthy? Are you sleeping? Maybe your sleep's getting disrupted because you're spending so much time like doom scrolling. Are you eating healthy? Like, are you taking that time, to like order, like a healthy meal or to like, get ingredients to be able to create like a healthy meal for you? Time is I've noticed is a huge impact like on like your mental state. Like it's really easy to just kind of get caught in like a rut of just wasting your time, whether it's through like doom scrolling or binging on Netflix. And don't get me wrong, like I do enjoy, like scrolling on the gram or watching like a good comedy like on Netflix, but I try to limit like how much time like I spend sitting down like binge watching like a show. Because I found when I spend too much time doing that, it's not very productive, and I kind of regret it like a little bit like later on. But it definitely is like a fine line and balance between, enjoying like those activities and like decompressing and just kind of relaxing versus using those activities to kind of distract you from what's like actually going on. I've noticed a lot of people, especially like when you're struggling, like in a slump, you tend to find activities that will distract you from some of those worries and some of those anxiety. And that kind of becomes like a placeholder, like for your mind, just like focus on, so you can ignore what the actual issues are, which that's not healthy. It's not a very healthy way to cope with those and to work through some of those challenges. So just kind of be mindful and be cognizant of that. Another thing that I like to do, like when I'm checking in with myself, I actually did this like a few days ago because, like I said, I've just been in such a bad slump, and so I like to break out of like my routine. I'll add in like additional activities that, like, so will nourish like my mind, my body, my soul. And this can be as simple as changing up like where I'm going to go and work, or changing up like my environment. So sometimes I'll go to like a nice cafe and we'll work, and not for like my professional job. Like maybe I'll go there and sometimes study for like my professional job, but for, like for this podcast or for other ventures that I'm working on, it's kind of nice to be able to get out of my current environment, go someplace new, get a nice cappuccino, and just focus on being there, like in the present, focus either on like work, or I actually do a lot of like self-reflection while I'm there. And so I did that this past weekend. I went there with the mindset of like, okay, like I'm going to work on this podcast, maybe create some stuff for like social media. I didn't get any of that done. I actually spent the entire time just doing some like internal analysis and kind of just some like deep diving of like, hey, like what's going on here? Like, let's check in with myself and kind of get my shit together and, go forward from there. So a combination of like mind dumping and then, reviewing like what some of my goals are and like the vision that I have for my life. And it's totally okay if it changes. Like life is going to change and it's going to morph and progress. But I do think it's important to be able to take that time like for yourself and check in. And so, yeah, so I did that this weekend. And one of the questions that I asked myself was like, who would I be like if I didn't have like these worries or concerns? And, it was like a pretty like good question, because it's like it kind of forces you to, like I said, to evaluate like, okay, like if I wasn't worried about like work, or if like money wasn't an issue, or if I wasn't worried about, like passing this class or getting like this grade, like where would my focus and attention be with who I am? And so with that question, like if you didn't have like that worry or those concerns, you get more of an internal view of like who you are like at your core. And it also kind of reveals like what's important to you. And so for me, some of those things that were important to me is like, I like having like professional security, professional and financial like security. So, what are some of those things I'm doing to, to be able to provide that? Another thing that's important that like I have been lacking, that I learned from like the self-reflection is like my social life. I am a like introverted extrovert, where like I'm literally like 50-50 on the line. It's kind of crazy whenever I take those tests. But that's one of those things that like have really been struggling with, was because like I was gone for so long last year. So coming back to where I live, my pretty much entire social structure was just like non-existent, and that's been a huge struggle for me. Trying to rebuild my social life again, and kind of like that support group and that encouragement that I had a pretty solid and a really good foundation in before like I left. But just through a combination of just like life events and then people moving away, I don't have like that structure. I don't have much of a structure anymore. And so, taking that time to like step back and kind of think like, okay, like what can I do to rebuild like the structure, and check in with myself and realize and and acknowledge, and acknowledge that having a social life is one of those things that like I value and that I would like to build, into my life. It's important to me, and it's a need that I have. It's the same thing too of dating. Like it's dated off and on, like since I got divorced. And finally took the plunge after I got divorced. So I got divorced back in 2016, and like didn't date for like 5 years after. It was pretty wild how long I didn't date. And some of it wasn't really planning on taking that long off, but a lot of it was just like I just needed that time to kind of heal and work through what I needed to work through, and then kind of like rebuild, trust again. And then to like get ready to go into like the dating pool, because that was some baggage that like I didn't want to take forward, and I did not want to take forward like into a future relationship. And so I started dating again a couple years ago, off and on. The pool's kind of scary, I'll just be honest. It has not been the greatest, but putting myself out there and getting to like know people, I've met some really cool people, that have added some really awesome like benefits, and I've learned a lot of things like about myself with, jumping back into the dating pool. I mean, back into like the dating pool, not necessarily like people, but where's the people that make it. Sorry, I'm really struggling a bit today. And I'm kind of talking off the cuff with this. I don't have like any show notes or anything for this episode. I'm just kind of speaking from the heart here, and just kind of organizing some of my thoughts a bit more like as I'm talking about this. But so dating is one of those things that like I would like to add like back into my life. And so getting out, changing up like my environment was kind of nice to be able to give me that space to be able to sit down and write through this. And kind of recage me on like, hey, like here's like what some of my goals are, and to get like refocused on, on like those goals. And I covered the gamut from like my professional goals, my hobbies, side hustles, working out, like my relationships, things that I'm inspired by, places I want to travel to, so kind of you can throw in kind of like a vision board like aspect in there, like as you're planning like for a vision board. I didn't end up doing that, but I just strictly just like wrote it down. But it helped give me like some clarity and just some more focus of going forward, and reminded me of like, hey, like here's my priorities and here's my goals. Now what am I going to do, to achieve that? So another area with that for achieving that, and then also for pulling yourself out of the slump, is like finding support. This has been such a godsend in my life when I've gone through periods of hardship. It's a huge reason why I can attribute to like why I'm here today, has been due to having good people like in my life. And I can't stress enough like how important it is to surround yourself with positive influences, and to surround yourself with those people that you can trust, that you can confide in. And that can be friends, family, especially when you're going through like very difficult times, because sometimes all you need is just a listening ear, or someone who has sound advice or like a different perspective. Or sometimes you just need like a cheerleader who can encourage you and just remind you that like you're doing well, and to keep going and to follow your dreams. We all need that at some point like in our life, that assurance, like, hey, like you're doing good, you're doing okay. Or, hey, remember like that goal that you have, or like that dream, like you can still make that happen. I've been able to move mountains like in my life by having just some of those key people in my life who have been able to provide me that bit of inspiration in that time of need. And it's been pretty amazing just seeing the opportunities that opened up and what I was able to move forward and into, just because that one person took the time to like listen, to like my struggles, or to give me that advice and that encouragement. to be able to pull myself like out of that slump or to be able to get through those hard times. So those are the type of people that like you need to surround yourself with. The next thing is embracing like imperfection, and then also like practicing like self-compassion. You've got to understand that like no one in life is perfect. It's okay to strive for progress, but perfection is not realistic. You're going to lose so much joy like in your life when you try really hard to focus on controlling every aspect and to perfect every single aspect of your life. Murphy's going to show up and he's going to fuck it up somewhere. And sometimes you just have to roll with it. And where we get all that extra stress is like when we're trying to control some of those circumstances that are just outside of your control. So you need to have a more open mind of like what you can embrace in life, and the separating like, okay, what's within your realm of control and then what's outside of it, and staying open to like what life has to offer, and then to those possibilities of what life is going to give you. Because there's always going to be a degree of uncertainty with life. You just never know what's going to happen. And with that, be kind to yourself. Everyone's going to experience like setbacks. Sometimes, like I said, Murphy's going to show up and like he's just going to knock you flat on your ass, or you're going to have things that like hit you out of the blue. Like that's, like my divorce was kind of like that. There were some things that came up like in my divorce that like I was not expecting, kind of hit me out of the blue, was not kind of ready for, and it was hard. It definitely fell into like a pretty deep slump, but I had some good people, and then took action to be able to kind of like move out of that, and then recognize that like, okay, that was outside of my control. That was a setback. Divorce, I had to kind of redefine like how I looked at divorce. I could look at it as a failure, or I could look at it as like, hey, like it was a success. Like I'm here today despite that, like, because for all intents and purposes, like I probably shouldn't be here through like my divorce, or after if I didn't get divorced. And that was honestly probably like one of the best decisions like I ever made in my life, and for unlocking like who I am and like moving forward. And so but it took some time for me to like process that and internalize like, hey, like these things that like happened, or like his decisions were not, that was out of my hands. Like that was his decisions to make. And I had to be kind with myself and kind of reframe like my perspective with it. And, it's going to happen. Like you're going to have those times when like you get in your own head, like you're going to self-doubt. You can what if situations like all you want, and focus, either on like the past, what if like past situations, but then also like even looking forward, like you can get caught in that cycle of like worry and concern and just wanting to control. And that's, it's normal, but you've got to recognize that like everyone experiences challenges like along like their journey, and you've got to take those actions and those steps like to move forward. Don't let those thoughts like consume like your life. Don't stay stuck in the past. You got to move forward. Like life is fucking amazing. There's so many good things like in this life, and like I promise it's going to get better. And that like everyone experiences challenges. Everyone does. Not everyone's very public about it. Like for me, it took me a very long time to become more public about like some of my challenges and experiences I've had, but like you're not alone like on this journey, and you're going to make it through it. And that's where like as you're focusing like on your journey and moving forward, like this is so hard to do, like when you have your head down and then you're focused just on how you're presently like feeling. It's so easy to get caught in that like slump of like self-pity, or just like being uninspired and just not moving off the X. And that's probably one of the worst things that you can do. Like I said, it's normal and it happens, but you've got to move off that X at some point. And that's where having someone encourage you, or finding that inspiration again by taking that time to like find that spark that can help inspire you to like to enjoy the process of growth and like self-discovery. Because it's, again, like I promise you, like there's so much good that's in this life, and shitty situations don't last forever. Like they do get better, and there's so much goodness that's out there for you. You just have to be open to it. You have to be open to receiving it, and then make those positive actions and steps like and build it into your life to be able to receive that. And that can be as simple as, like I said, like having someone, encouraging you. Listen to a positive podcast. Take that time, like what I did, this past weekend. I went to a cafe and I sat there and I read and I wrote. I did a lot of self-reflection, and then I rewrote some of my goals and like my vision that I have for my life. And it was pretty cathartic. Like I really love like writing, and then I'm terrible at journaling, which is kind of funny, but I do love taking that time to like write and just kind of like mind map and just like mind dump like all my stuff on like a piece of paper. And I just feel so much better because it just gives me the ability to be able to like organize my thoughts and analyze. And it's the same way too. Like if I have a really good friend and conversation, like I love deep conversation and having those friends that like you can trust. Because sometimes I'll just kind of like verbally like vomit like a bunch of stuff out there. But through the process of talking about it, I'm mentally analyzing and organizing it and like processing, and it just helps out so much. So find a technique that works for you. And like I said, to be able to process that and to be able to like move forward, out of that slump, focus on those goals that like you wrote down. Like I said, some of the goals that like I wrote down was, what I wanted for this podcast. What are some of the goals that I have for Not Your Average Blonde? For the Pilates instructor certification, I have been kind of going back and forth, which kind of added some self-induced stress onto my life, funny enough, for what I want to do with that certification. Do I want to open a brick and mortar store? Do I want to like launch it virtually? Do I just want to get this certification for just my own like self-knowledge and to be able to practice it intermittently off and on? Just trying to figure out, okay, like what road or which route do I want to take with that? Which like I have time, like I don't have to make that decision right now, which is really cool. I would leaning towards one over the other two, but at the end of the day, like I had to recognize it took me sitting down and analyzing and recognizing like, hey, like I have time, like I don't have to make this decision like right this second, and I can enjoy like the process and the journey of becoming a Pilates instructor and like building like that knowledge, because I love instructing. It's so much fun. I actually started, a little side tangent, I actually started instructing when I was in college, teaching Krav Maga and then yoga. And it was really cool just for like my own like self-awareness and edification of, as I pursued those practices, but then also like I loved sharing with other people just the benefits that like it gave me. Like yoga like saved my mental health going through my divorce, but being able to provide that like instruction and being able to help like other people through, becoming more aware of like their body or their movements or helping them feel better, or just finding like a better mental space, through for that, 45, 60-minute time period that I have them for. Like I can go on and on about it, but that was, some of the inspiration I had for pursuing this Pilates instructor certification. I also reviewed some like my professional goals for like my current job. I'm kind of in this like weird limbo where like I've found that like I have some incongruence with like what I'm doing, which kind of really sucks. And I'll talk about it in another episode later, like when I'm ready. But I'm, kind of having some internal like dialogue that's going on there, because like I absolutely love my job. I don't necessarily love the company, but I really love what I do, like at the end of the day, and the core of like who I am and the impact that I have like with my work. And it's something that like I truly do like believe in, but I don't necessarily agree with the practices or like the management like practices and the corporation, like if you will. And so I'm having some incongruence like with that like I'm working through. And like I said, like I'll talk about it in another episode on another day. But I'm trying to think back. Some of the other like items I wrote down was just, like my personal goals, like relationships, and then becoming more deliberate with how I date. And dating it's like I said, it's kind of funny because I've dated very much off and on. I just jumped back into the dating pool again. Actually went on like my first date in a long time, like the other weekend, but it's been off and on like over the years. And I prefer to organically like meet someone versus utilizing the apps. But sometimes the apps, like I have to jump on it and just kind of put yourself out there more to date. And so that's like an area where I'm like, okay, like if I want a relationship, like I actually need to go out and go meet people. I need to put myself out there and be open to, meeting other people and opportunities. And so those are some of the things that like I was thinking about and that I wrote down and, thought through like my goals and kind of like, okay, like how am I going to get there? I didn't establish like for this time, I did not establish like hard deadlines like for those things, but it gave me enough of like a mental space just to kind of like process and like think through, like where I'm at and like where I want to go. So that way I can kind of pull myself like out of the slump. Cause like I said, imposter syndrome has been so real. I usually don't struggle with it. I'm pretty confident. Maybe occasionally we'll go through like brief periods, but it's very, very brief. With it, I like to pursue things like with a very open mindset, and I love learning new things, and I'm pretty open to change. So working through kind of the imposter syndrome, especially with like this podcast. And it's kind of hit me in like all aspects of my life, like professionally, with like Pilates, like with this. It was just a really weird like slump to kind of work through. But, I'm working through it, coming up on the up and up, which is nice. But it definitely like threw me for a bit of a loop like the past couple weeks. And, that was one of those things where like I found like, hey, like I needed that nudge. I have good friends that, they don't live here like anymore, but like I still talk with, that can kind of give me a little bit more of that insight and some of that encouragement, and can help kind of change up my routine a little bit. So I made some plans to go visit some of them like in the future, having these conversations and just kind of reminding each other like, hey, like, like you're doing great. And so, at the end of the day, it's just truly seeing that like the only thing that's like standing between like where I am and like where I want to be is how I perceive like the things that are going on around me. And so it was just a big mindset like shift for that. And I'm kind of getting close to, I think, kind of the end of like what I want to talk about today. Like the biggest takeaway for this, for like pulling yourself out of the slump, is just making that mindset shift, recognizing it, making that mindset shift, after you've done like that analysis, and then taking action and like going forward. Start off with asking yourself that question of like, what are your basic needs? And then who would you be like if you didn't have those worries and concerns that's like kind of burdening you like right now? If you didn't have like worries and concerns, like what clarity do you have with who you are like at your core and like where you want to go and like what's important to you? Do you want to be more present? Do you want to live with more joy? Like I want to love without fear and like trust, ultimately like trusting in like the flow of life. Because as I've reiterated just throughout like these episodes, like life is so good and there's so much positivity and beauty that's like within it. And it's waiting for you. Like it's there for you. Like life wants to give you those opportunities, and it can truly be good. Even with all the shit and stuff that's going on like in the world, like there is so much goodness that's out there. And I've met so many people along my journey who have had like just insane stories of what they've overcome or even circumstances that they're in, but they have such a positive outlook and perspective in life, and they have found some of that genuine happiness. And I'll, continue to share some of those like with you like throughout like this podcast, but it just is another testament again to just how at the end of the day, like when you take like that action and like you push yourself forward and you have that confidence, like knowing that like it's always going to work out and there are going to be good things in store for you like in this life, because life is beautiful and it can be so, so good. And so work through that season and doubt, and the worry will pass, and move forward. There's so much good for you that's in store for you, and you just got to remain open to it. So thank you for joining me today for this brief podcast and for letting me just kind of talk about just being in a slump. If you want to join me again next week, I would greatly appreciate it. So thanks for joining me today on Not Your Average Blonde.